If it's cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Stephen Buhner. In this interview that you did with him, he referred to these plants as largely being psychoactive, referring to wild plants. I found this to be fascinating. He said that a lot more plants that we think of are psychoactive. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit. What's he talking about here?
Well, we're deep in the interview here, so I guess I can get a little more controversial. I don't think the haters will make it this far in. Um, Here's the thing, before we go into what he meant by that, I want to say this. Psychoactive plants, plants that get you high, are more than natural to us. They're an integral part of a natural diet. We are suffering from a deficiency of those plants. I think we'll eventually see that entheogenic substances are a type of like nutrient for us. And we are lacking that nutrient because we've made these things illegal. But if we look around at it, you guys smirking over there. If we look at indigenous cultures, we see that if there are psychoactive plants available in their ecosystem, they use them. Sometimes they use ones that for the average person would be way too strong, right? I've met people from cultures who use plants like datura, which are radically strong, radically strong. I mean, I spoke to a shaman in Peru once, and I said, what if I wanted to try datura? And he said, oh yeah, 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 okay, well, we would make you go on a diet for 6 months, and then I would have three shamans here, and we would put stakes on the ground. We would tie you to the ground while you took it. Very powerful plant. So, but really, those psychoactive plants are incredibly you are used ubiquitously. The only places that we don't see them being used are places where they're not available, like the Arctic. They're of course they just don't have access to psychoactive plants. People who moved that far north, like the Inuit people, and yet interestingly, what we do see is that those people would find ways to use syncopated drum beat to achieve altered states of awareness. So they would find a way to almost recreate the psychedelic experience, the entheogenic experience, through drumbeat and hypnosis, because it was so important to them. We have divorced ourselves from that, and it's like we're missing that nutrient. Why is it a nutrient? Because psychoactive plants, typically what we're talking about are substances that are neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters create bonding in the brain, and they allow basically the transmission of thought, essentially. What happens when we have high doses for short periods of time of non-toxic neurotransmitters? We have new thoughts, new ideas, and we lay down new synaptic networks in our brain. We become aware that last after the experience ends. We call them entheogens, this idea of narcotics and psychoactives, and then eventually this idea that they started calling them psychedelics. They were calling them hallucinogens. That wasn't really fair because you don't really hallucinate with these plants. Eventually this term has emerged, entheogen, which means basically to have an internal religious experience. That experience stays with people. It isn't something that you just have transiently while you're using the plant. And indigenous cultures knew this. So it wasn't like, every morning they would have, ayahuasca the way we would have coffee or something, right? They would use these things in ceremony, gain the experience, and bring that experience back into the regular life. We really are lacking that. Or maybe we still have it, but we don't have it with the sacred connotation. So what we have is a big, an experience of that as teenagers. Maybe a lot of people have that, but they're running around like hiding because it's illegal and they're risking their health, or they get involved with substances. Lately, I've been trying to come up with the opposite word, entheogen. What would be the opposite? I was thinking of bath salts as like help you find the inner demon, right? Like
Yeah.
the devil inside, right? But there are all these plants that are basically found all around the world that are crucial to our brain development, and probably very crucial to how we got to where we are today in our brain development anyway. So I think we're really lacking in those. And then I think to get back to what Stephen meant was there are plants that alter our consciousness at a much more subtle level. that we're not aware of for two reasons. One, because we're not experimenting with enough plants, and two, because our awareness is incredibly blunted. My good friend Arthur Haynes, he's got this list of characteristics of what we call Homo sapien domestico fragilis. That's our name for the domesticated human. And one of the characteristics is a blunted awareness. They move through the world in sort of a haze. They're not aware of their surroundings. They're not aware of their internal experience even. They're distracted all the time, so that something that's mildly psychoactive might not be noticeable to them. And people take incredibly strong pharmaceutical drugs now, or natural drugs like, let's say, caffeine. People take in really huge doses every single day, such that they're not really aware of subtlety anymore. They can't feel it. So I think what Stephen was saying is that people got really clean inside and calm in the mind and explored plants from that perspective, that a lot of things have an effect on the mind that maybe we're not aware of, and that ultimately, let me see, if we could come up with a baseline, like, here's my baseline, I'm not interacting with anybody, I've had no substances, this is just my baseline psychological state. Any person I interact with is going to change my brainwaves, right? In other words, everybody's psychoactive to me, right? Any book I read, anything I interact with is going to change. So similarly, if we could determine a baseline, any plant I interact with is going to affect, but it's essentially psychoactive. And I think that's what he's saying, is that every plant that comes into your life is a kind of entity or a being that has some effect on you. But sometimes we just need to go deep in subtleties. Now in South America, the Peruvians have a system of medicine slash shamanism. I don't really separate that. And they have something they call dieta, which is a diet that you go on when you're learning to work with a plant. And that diet is designed to be the opposite of stimulating. The opposite. You don't have salts, you don't have oils, you don't have spicy, pungent flavors. Everything is designed to bring you to baseline, and then you consume lots of your teacher plant or your medicine plant. That allows you to really tune into what that plant does.
Do they stay on that diet for long periods of time, or just when they're going to use the medicine?
No, you go on that diet when you're working with a master plant. So they have their list of what they call master plants. Some of those master plants are strongly psychoactive, some are not. You go on that diet and you consume lots of your medicine. So if you went down right now to Peru and you got with an herbalista of some kind, and they were going to work with you, they'd determine what plant you needed. But in order for you to really feel that plant, they would want to restrict back all the things that stimulate you so much that you wouldn't notice what that plant's doing, if that makes sense. So it's difficult because our baseline here is like,
yeah, it's everywhere.
So I think that's kind of what Stephen's saying, is that we're not really tuned into our baseline, makes it difficult for us to be aware of what things do. And then what I want to add to that is that I really believe psychoactive plants, whether those, and when I say plants, I really mean to include psychoactives in general. So that could be something as exotic as the Bufo alivarius toad secretion in the southwest of the United States, or the saguaro cactus, which grows in our deserts here, or that could be fungal substances like psilocybin, or what we often call psilocybin, which is a DMT molecule, basically a DMT form of DMT. That could be ayahuasca, a two-plant or more mixture from South America. That could be iboga from Africa. We could go on, and we could list hundreds of strong, powerful psychoactives that have long historical use. Peyote from Mesoamerica, on and on and on and on. There's all of these plants that have been used by cultures to explore the potential of our neocortex. And we don't have that now, and I really think we're suffering from that. And we did see a huge infusion of it in the 1960s and the 1970s, which led to things like computers, internet, right? Like all of this amazing stuff that kind of seems to have come out of nowhere actually was born out of the entheogenic experience. Anyway, the more we restrict that back, I think the more we do a disservice to ourselves. And the more difficult it is for us to connect with our source, such that we have a lot of religions, but not a strong spiritual connection. And I don't mean people who are like, oh, I'm pretty spiritual. I mean that strong experience of the divine. That's different. The religious experience, the entheogenic experience is different.
The kind you don't really talk about. You don't really have to talk about.
Because you can't, because words don't, because it's an experience and you don't get there meditating. Sorry, meditators. Meditation's great. You get to other places, but you don't get there. I know you don't. You don't get there eating Pop Tarts. You just don't. It's these plants, and they're in our environment for a reason, and they're in our history for a reason, and we do require them. And most people eventually find their way back to them, I've noticed. But unfortunately, we have to do so in a kind of secrecy because these things are classed the same way drugs like heroin, cocaine, OxyContin are classed, which is really unfair because usually they're whole foods. They
It's
literally
crazy.
are whole foods. Yeah.
It's crazy too because it's not that we don't like psychoactive substances in this country or in this society, because there are plenty of them to point at that we love, like sugar and coffee or caffeine, like you were saying.
And that's a wait. Let's go. Let's take that further too. I want to actually expand on that because first, I love caffeine and all of its related molecules. I think they're fabulous. I love the whole cocktail of them. I personally, my strategy for not getting too addicted to any one form is I switch between them all. So last week I came through a heavy, heavy series of cola nut drinks. Now, cola nut for you coffee heads out there is probably doubly strong as anything you get out of it. But anyway, I really love caffeine. I love mate, another plant that I use very frequently. The thing I've noticed about coffee is unique in the jittery high that you can get from it.
Hmm.
Now, if you take a month off from drinking coffee and you go get a double espresso, I question whether driving or operating heavy machinery at that point is
Yes.
a good idea. It's a strong
I've
psychoactive.
noticed the same thing.
Definitely.
Right. So go get some Native American Nicotiana rustica tobacco, right? The real deal tobacco, not the weak stuff sold in those cigarette boxes, but the real deal. And you take a hit off of a pipe, and believe me, you're sitting down. You might puke and you might defecate in your pants. It's that strong, right? It's that strong. And for people who smoke, remember the first time they smoked being like, whoa, lightheaded, right? So we do use drugs in our culture, but we prefer stimulants because of our 40-hour work week kind of culture.
Hmm.
But the pharmaceutical industry is now selling drugs that are on par with cocaine and heroin. I know here in Maine we have a huge problem with OxyContin, which is basically a synthetic heroin. Now you can go into any doctor here and you can have a backache and you can walk out with synthetic heroin. And what happens here is that people become addicted to it. They start buying it on the street. Eventually, they're crushing it and snorting it. And for a lot of people, they end up shooting it up, and then they end up in a rehab, dead, or in prison. And that's a real problem here. However, it's legal the way that it's being distributed. There are these sort of entities who figured out a way to sell their drugs on the street lawfully, and they're even actually protected by the law. So there's no issue with psychoactives here in our culture. But the ones that seem to be the most feared are the ones that truly alter your paradigm. Cocaine doesn't alter your paradigm, right? Cocaine may alter your mind state, may alter your perception at the time you're using it, but it doesn't give people the profound awakening that makes them want to radically alter the way they live their lives, the way that maybe one time consuming psilocybin mushrooms would do, right? That changes that freaks people out.
Yeah.
Actually, that's what's freaking people out. So it's interesting that the things that have, because the changes that I've seen people make using entheogens have been almost always positive. In fact, I struggle to think of times where it's not positive. I mean, mostly what I've seen is really positive changes in people. Um, for some reason, that's not acceptable in our culture. But the drugs that are acceptable have often really negative consequences. So, people can figure that out how they want to, but it's definitely not the anti-drug culture is not looking out for your best interests. That's for sure.
Yeah, so it's in order to become healthy and vital like we want to be, we must become more self-aware. We need to become aware of what we're putting into our body and things like this. But most of the things that are in our environment blunt us, so we can't become self-aware. And the things that can really become self-aware are either crazy or they are illegal, for the most part. I mean, in the current kind of environment. So we just got to kind of take that for what it is and begin to go in
Yep.
what direction we feel
And I
need.
just want to put this out there too, is because I certainly don't want to like promote people putting themselves at legal risk, you know. But it's amazing to travel in a place like South America. Well, actually, I'll say in Peru, where there's all of these. Peru has a unique constant. Peru is one of the centers of planetarily, one of the true centers of human development. So basically, we see in Mesopotamia, China, and Peru these sort of the first of civilization where people start to self-organize, right?
Does this have anything to do with these ley lines that we talk about? The
Well, whether it does or not, I won't get into that yet. What I'll say is that it does. There's a massive concentration of psychoactive plants that grow there. That's
cool,
for sure. That's for
cool.
sure. And they're all legal there. So in a place like Peru, you can go and experiment and explore all these different substances, and you're not breaking the law, which is really cool. But another piece I want to add is that ultimately, I don't think I articulated this well before, but these things are tremendous technology because they allow us to rewire our brains. Remember I said neurotransmitters cause bonding in the brain and they help us lay down new synaptic networks. So the thing is that often hear people talk about wanting to change and they don't understand that in order to change, often you have to change the underlying belief system, the paradigm. And the paradigm is everything you believe before you even know you believe it, right? It's everything you think before you think. It's your operating system, right? Mac doesn't wake up one day and think, I want to be a PC and just change. You have
Mm-hmm.
to rewrite the whole thing. It is a Mac. It's how it's formatted, right? So we run a certain kind of like software almost, or we're like a certain kind of operating system. And we're running like Western world United States 2.0. And if we want to shift into something else, we have to rewire ourselves. It's not as easy as just being like, oh, I'd like to change. Those kind of plants, those kind of substances offer us the ability to see, hear, feel, taste, experience things in such a radically new way that our belief systems are fundamentally shaken and our brains are rewired, literally rewired at the synaptic level, so that we come out of those experiences running kind of new software. So, I mean, I'm obviously not a tech savvy person, and people who are listening can catch that. But if you can piece together the metaphor I'm trying to use there, we can literally alter our brains, and we can consciously direct how that goes. And I don't really think, yeah, I mean, it's not easy to do that with books or watching YouTube videos. Those things all can be helpful to us, but I'm talking about an accelerated learning path when we work with these kind of substances.
Yeah, we're taking our subconscious mind, which is running 90, 95% of the show all the time, taking an aspect of it that we don't necessarily like or that we don't even know that's sabotaging us, and we're going in and we're putting a better one in there or a different one in there.
Yeah, like,
Yeah, and also too, just to make sure this clear, they're starting to do a lot of science on this. They're starting to do some research on this with maps and things like this, who's actually showing long-lasting positive effects from some of these psychoactive plants. So it's coming. The research is coming back. It looks like so. Hopefully, we can continue to go in that direction.
and I love so I always love to get and I love so I always love to get research because it's so that's the kind of system that I'm running currently because of the world that I was brought up in. But then let's use common sense for a second. We have 200,000 years in our modern anatomical form. So obviously humans, our history reaches back millions of years, but in our modern form, we're 200,000 years old. We use these plants in every culture up until, I mean, literally yesterday in our history, right? Like we use it up until just recently. Then we make this big change. We decide we're not allowed to use them. They're suddenly no, no, no bad. We watch our culture take a nosedive towards destruction, right? So we know they couldn't have been. It's not like, oh, we finally figured out those were bad for us. No, those were working. That was working all the way up until we decided to stop. And that is part that seems to be related to, or at least part of, or wrapped up in this nosedive that we take as a civilization, where now we're literally having worldwide the question of, I mean, we're seriously asking ourselves the question, will our species and every other species even survive what we've done? Will we even survive this, or have we already put the final nail in the coffin? Like, can humans even make it through this? And will we destroy the ecosystem? I mean, we're like literally having that question's being discussed on a worldwide level. How did we get here? Well, part of how we got here is we stopped doing what was working, and those plants were a part of what was working.
We stopped taking psychedelics yesterday, and we're probably going to die tomorrow.
All right, you said that, not me. That's not my submission. But I mean, it's all very woven together. And the thing is that psychoactive plants are a food. They are a food, and we can't just separate them like, oh, they're on their own little category. Like if we went and looked at indigenous cultures, we don't see like, oh, they've got, these are herbs, these are foods, these are drugs. It's like, it's all one holistic way of living. We're the ones who've separated it into all these little categories, and that doesn't seem to be holistic enough. It doesn't work.